Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today we're going to open day 8 of the 12 days of Stitchmas Calendar. So if you don't want to see what's under day 8 yet, then save this video to watch for later. But I'm going to open the window and then we're going to create a card with it. So this is your last chance if you don't want to see it. So in this window, we have an ornament die, some greenery, a poinsettia, and some holly. So this is right up my alley. I love floral dies and foliage dies and creating little arrangements with them. So this is absolutely perfect. So I'm going to do my die cutting off screen and I'll be back to do some of the stitching. So I've done some of the stitching off screen, but I'm going to do the ornament as well as one of the pine branches. So just like before, I start my thread through the hole from the back to the front and then use a little bit of Best Ever craft tape to hold that in place while I'm stitching. And this one has a really nice and simple stitching pattern. I start at the outside, go through the inside hole, and then back up to the outside. The other way you could do this is doing stitching just around the outside edge, just for something a little bit different. If you want more ideas on what to do with this, check out the playlist that Spellbinders has on it. You might hear a familiar voice for day 8 and a couple other samples for that day as well. So if you want more inspiration, that's a great place to go to find out what to do with your calendar. So as soon as I'm done the stitching for this, I'm going to put the thread on the back and I'm going to use another little piece of Best Ever craft tape to hold that in place. I'm going to snip off that excess thread and then I'm going to glue the shadow or the solid piece behind it. Once again, this is just an easy way to seal in all of those threads, make sure that there's nothing hanging loose, and it's going to make it a little bit easier for when we're gluing everything together. I'm using my reverse tweezers to hold everything in place while I start working on the stitching for the pine needles or pine branches. I chose to do a non-traditional color scheme for this. So for my ornament, I just used the silver that was in the add-on kit. For these branches here, I'm using teal topaz, and I'm stitching it with the lighter of the teal colored threads. These are also in the add-on kit. This would also look really nice with the light colored waterfall branches with the darker colored thread. Or I think it would even be really pretty with silver thread. I didn't use silver because we don't have any in the add-on kit and I'm trying to stick to those colors. But every once in a while, I love going with non-traditional color schemes, and this is no different. So when I did the pine branches, I started at the stem end of the pine branches. I was worried that if I started at the other end, I would mess up which stitch was supposed to go where. And by starting at the base end or the stem end, I could confidently do the whole branch and not have to worry if I was doing the correct spacing or the correct holes or not. Just made it very easy and I didn't have to actually worry about that while I was doing it. So for the stitching for this, not only are we doing the pine needles from the center to the outside, but we're also doing the line down the center that the pine needles would attach to. So while I'm going down this pine branch, I'm making sure to do all of those places. You could also just do the needles first and then go down the center and do the center part, but I found it really easy just to do all of it at once, work my way from the stem end of the needle to the tip end of the needle, and then be done. So this is my 5th one here. I did 4 of them off screen. So you can do as many or as few as you want. I want to do kind of a little bit of a swag in the middle of my card. So I wanted it to be a little bit asymmetrical. So I'm going to do 2 of the stems on one side, 3 of the stems on the other side. I always like to make sure to have everything completely done before I start to assemble. So I kind of figured out how many I was going to need ahead of time. So I also cut solid pieces to glue behind. So I'm going to glue that to that, use my reverse tweezers to hold those in place. I did find with this branch, because it's a little bit longer, that after I had my reverse tweezers on there, I did pinch some of the areas that may have come apart because the tweezers weren't long enough to hold everything together. For the little ornament hanger, I just glued that to the top, just put some glue on the bottom of it and then attached that to the edge of the ornament. For the poinsettias, I just like to use my fingers to round the poinsettia petals. Then I put a dot of glue in the center of one of them. I position them so that they're positioned exactly the same way, but before I put one on top of the other, I turn it 180 degrees and I get perfect position or perfect placement that way. While my glue on those pieces are drying, I'm just going to do my sentiment, and I'm choosing one of the sentiments that's in the stamp set with the add-on kit. This one is Deck the Halls, and I'm just going to stamp it with Salvage Patina Distress ink. I'm using my Misty stamping tool so that if I don't get perfect placement the first time, and I didn't, or perfect stamping the first time, I can stamp it a second time or even a third time just to make sure I get a nice clear stamping of that sentiment. With that done, I can take that out of the Misty stamping tool and I can attach it to my base. So my base is waterfall cardstock. This is one of the cardstocks that is in the add-on kit. And it makes a nice outline for the card, and it coordinates beautifully with the die cuts as well as the stitched die cuts. There is also holly in this set here, and I used the waterfall cardstock to die cut that holly. So you are going to see bits of that peeking out from behind the poinsettias, and the stitching on the pine leaves is very close to the waterfall color as well, or pine branches, so it'll all coordinate beautifully. So I'm going to put those first two stems down, and you saw that I figured out my placement on top of my acrylic block. I was pretty sure how I was going to do it, but it's always nice to confirm that what I have in my head is going to look how I'm wanting it to look. I put two of them down first with the stems, and for the rest of them, I just cut the stems off. There's no stitching there, so it's not going to harm anything, and it just make it so I can make them closer together and not have those stems in the way. After I have those stems down, I'm going to glue down the ornament. I chose to do one ornament here, but you could add in others if you wanted. I didn't want the ornaments and the poinsettias to compete with each other, and I didn't want it to be too much in there, so I thought just one ornament was perfect. Then I'm going to glue my poinsettias, and after that I'm going to glue my holly behind the poinsettias. When I was coming up with this design in my head, I wanted to do the poinsettias, but I thought they were going to be more on the greenery, and once I had them placed and saw that the white poinsettias were right on the white background, I figured I would put the holly in behind those just to break up that background from the poinsettias so you could see them just a little bit better. And I like the way that it does look this way. Before gluing those holly down, I shaped them very similar to how I shaped the poinsettias, and then I only put the glue on the stem end of the holly just to make sure that that will stick down. The holly itself will kind of curve and give a little bit of shape to the base of the card. I wanted to put a little bow on my ornament, so I started with the floss that I had used to stitch my greenery, and as I was doing it, I changed my mind and I ended up doing one with the white floss that's in the add-on kit. I didn't like the way this bow was looking, and I figured that the white was going to show up just a little bit more. So I still have that in here, but I do change my mind and grab a little piece of the white floss. The white floss itself is a little bit thicker than those two strands that I had of the other floss anyway, so it's a tiny bit more of a substantial bow. So I tie my bow, make sure that that knot is nice and tight, and make sure that those loops are even. And then I put the tails together and cut them both at once so that I have those tails completely even and the same length. I'm going to use a dot of glue on the top of that ornament to glue it in place. I'm using the same Bearly Art glue that I've been using for all of these cards. And once that's in place, I'll let that sit for a little bit to let that glue start to set. It's really not going to want to hold until that glue starts to set. I'm going to use the aquamarine gems that are in the add-on kit, and I'm putting one in the center of the poinsettias. It's going to tie all of those colors together, and it adds just a nice little bit of sparkle. You could also put one in the center of the ornament or one of the pearls in the center of the ornament, but I left that on its own and just have the floss in there. Here is the final card. You could also take those gems and scatter a couple on the background, but I opted not to for this. Thank you so much for joining me for day 8. I really appreciate you spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow for day 9.